Okay, this is my first live. I saw one person was waiting, but I am new to live and my title screen is attached to a different streaming show. So I switched this over to here. Moral of the story, I'm going to give everybody like a minute just to switch over. And then we're going to jump into a show about dating out. Okay, so the beauty of all of this is that I can still use this as a learning experience. So even if I don't get an audience for this, that's fine. I'll just make this one of my regular broadcasts and upload it. And about to jump in. Okay. It's watching the show. Woman comes to the wise old sage and tells him that she wants it all. She's a reasonably attractive black woman. She's about 35 years old. The wise old sage looks at her and says, well, what is all? She's kind of perplexed. She wants to understand what he means. How dare he ask her that question? Everything that she can have, she responds. He just calmly looks at her and says, well, what exactly does that look like? She realizes that he's serious. He wants an answer. She said she wants it all, and he wants her to explain what all would look like. She reflects for a minute before coming to the realization that she has no clue. The wise old sage casts her from the mountain, and as she falls back down to the commons, he hears her say, come back to me when you've figured it out. That is, in a nutshell, one of the big problems we have with dating today. There are women who want the stars and the moon and who won't settle for less. Problem is, they've overestimated their value. These are women who are punching above their weight. They're not horrible women, they're normal women. However, they want abnormal outcomes. Women who are fives, not willing to settle for men who are anything less than nines and tens. As we start to look at dating, as we start to look at what's happening in the dating market, you start to see some trends. Marriage rates are on the decline. Dating is on the decline. Sex is on the decline. You start to look at numbers that suggest all-time lows in people's ability to interact with each other. But I'm going to challenge the idea that it's people who are the problem, because that's not what the numbers really play out. It's women who are the problem. We're in a situation where the views of the world around relationships have changed. And the new views hurt almost everybody. Once upon a time, you dated, you hoped to find someone you could build a life with. And when you found someone who you thought had value, you tried to build with them. The notion of dating to build has pretty much vanished. Now, dating is about thrills. I'm looking for someone who gives me the tingles. I'm looking for someone who's fun for tonight. I don't care about the future. I just care about right now. And right now, pretty wins. The problem with pretty is there aren't enough pretty people to go around. Just straight line things for a second. Rate everybody on a 10-point scale. Roughly speaking, you would expect 10% of the people to be ones, 10% of them to be twos, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way up to your 10% who are tens. Okay, let's just play it out that way for a minute. If no one's willing to settle for anything short of, let's say, an 8, you got 8s, 9s, and 10s who are available as men on the dating market, 30% of men, but you've got 60 to 70% of women who are looking for these same 8s, 9s, and 10s. So, by the math, 30% of men for 60 to 70% of women. There are more than twice as many women as men on the dating market with the potential to interact. If you're a 7, all the way down to a 1, you're doomed. You're just doomed. The way the dating world works today, you're not good enough. And it's a crushing fact to realize, but that is the reality of the day. Women are seeking the very best, not so much in some instances it would be understandable. Women who are 8s, 9s, and 10s and who pursue 8s, 9s, and 10s are being very logical. It's the 4s, the 5s, the 6s, the 7s who are holding out hope of landing someone who they never will that ruin things for everyone. Now, there's a notion that you really have to understand, which is that we're trying to overcome a story that's been planted in the minds of little girls at a very early age that has warped their view of relationships from a very early age, and that at this point in their lives is irrevocable. They will never stop believing the story. And the story basically goes like this: you're a beauty, you're a 10, you deserve a prince. So long as all of that holds true, this woman is settling for anything less than perfection. If she is dating someone who is not a prince, she's doing something wrong. Now, if she's an 8, 9, or a 10, then that's fine. But let's take a look at the dating market and let's really reflect on what we're seeing out here. Let's play this out with a story. A handsome lecturer has a conference in New York. The idea behind the conference is that he's talking to women about the men who they want and what they should do to pursue them. There are a room full of women who've paid to attend this conference and hear this man speak. He's a tall, handsome guy. He's the kind of guy they want. Hundreds of women are in this room trying to understand what it's going to take for them to land an 8, a 9, or a 10. They've been able to sleep with these guys They just haven't been able to get these guys to commit to them, and they don't understand why. The lecturer is happy to take their money and happy to give them some pointers on things that they can do to be more appealing. If you change your attitude, if you lower your guard a bit, if you show this man some respect and treat him as more than just an ATM machine, he will look at you more fondly. And these things are true. But he leaves out a very critical piece of information. Wisely, because there'd be no point in listening to his lecture if he didn't. But here's a simple fact. As you look across the room, the women who are in these sessions are largely not eights, nines, and tens. There are fives, there are sixes, there are threes. These are the women who've been able to sleep with the princes of the earth. They just haven't been able to secure these men for serious relationships. Part of what the lecturer doesn't bring up is the fact that these women are punching above their weight. Some of them are attractive, some of them are quite attractive. But generally speaking, they hold fairly consistent with the ranker. 10% are twos, 10% are threes, 10% are fours, etc. Reality is, those women will not land the princes. Those women are going to have to settle for regular Joes. Now, there's a second part of this story that the lecturer conveniently leaves out. And it's the whole notion of the friend zone and how women and men friend zone differently. Take a look at women. Take a look at how they date. They focus on relationships with men who are beautiful, eights, nines, tens. Mainly, I'm talking about women who are younger. As they get older, as their clock starts to run out, their priorities start to change. Take a look at these women and who they sleep with. The eights, the nines, the tens. They'll keep other men in their orbit, fives, sixes, sevens. Those are guys who can be friends, who they'll spend time with, who they'll use for emotional support. Those aren't men who they sleep with. Women don't sleep with men who are in their friend zone. The men in their friend zone are there for emotional support. Potentially, they're useful to these women later in life when they have to change their priorities for who they date and what they want from dating. But at their core, those are not the men these women want. Now, this is important because men's friend zones are very different. The basic idea is still the same. There are women who you will date seriously, and there are women who are going to be part of your friend zone. You'll interact with them, but you're never going to commit to them. However, as men, you can say we're dogs, or you can just say our priorities are different. Men will sleep with women who are in their friend zone. A woman in the friend zone is fine to have sex with, fine to have a casual, ongoing relationship with. But that is not the woman who you commit to. It's simply not the way it works. Women and men get into trouble when they cross signals. What I mean by that is when women look at men and say, why aren't you dating the way we date? Or when men look at women and say, why aren't you dating the way we date? They run into problems. That's where you start to find seeming disconnects that really don't exist. So, a woman who's normal, sleeps with a prince. In her mind, I only sleep with people who I'm interested in having serious relationships with. Therefore, if he's sleeping with me, that's how he views me. And that's not true. So she's had a relationship with a man who doesn't really care about having an ongoing uh, about building with her. She doesn't understand it. He's giving the signals that he's serious, but he's not following through. He's not giving the signals that he's serious. If he were a woman, his actions would suggest that he's serious, but he's a man. Different attitude, different expectation. We have to find a way to help people understand a couple of things. And it's not easy because it involves some very painful medicine, but it's the reality. People overrate themselves. Everyone thinks that they're a 10 or a 9, and they're not. Most of us are not. Look at my ratings. I mean, my face, when it comes to my face, I'm a troll. I have a lot of things going for me, but I'm never going to have the kind of face that makes people stop and say, hey, that's the guy I want. I have to compensate for that. I acknowledge that. There are women who are in the exact same situation. However, they still date as if they are the beauties in the fairy tales and they're going to win the prince. Now, so far, this has been a very general conversation about problems with dating overall. Doesn't necessarily tie to the title of dating out. So let's start to drill into this a bit more. Why is this a dating out series? Well, I'll relate to it on a personal level. I have a nephew who's in college. He's going to graduate in a couple of years. He's going to go out to the dating market, new college graduate, starting his career, and he's going to be very disappointed with the world and the way it works. He's going to find that, being at the bottom financially, being at the very beginning financially, there's not a lot of appeal for him from the women who are on his level because they want someone who's better. Now, if he starts to look at the manosphere and he starts to listen to the suggestions there, he's going to be crestfallen when he starts to hear these stories about how he should build himself up until he's 30 and established, at which point he can find a wife. Because, number one, he's 22. Why does he need to wait another 10 years to start living his life? I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't sign up for that. Number two, that's not really true. That's not the way things work. Okay. When you look at the Black community, let's think about, as men, what we want out of a relationship. So let's just kind of start with that. I was making notes about a couple of things that are important. If we really break down what we're looking for, it's not that complicated. What do you want? You want someone who's fit. You want someone who's fertile. You want someone who's youthful. You want someone who's childless, and you want someone who's agreeable. For the most part, that's it. A beautiful face would be, wonderful, but it's funny when you listen to the dating shows that stream on YouTube and you listen to what guys are asking for. They rarely ask for beauty. They want a woman who's not overweight, which isn't a lot to ask for, but beauty, very rarely in the consideration set. It's just not a requirement. Um, Problem is when you look at Black women, they become one of the worst choices on these metrics. From an obesity standpoint, you're probably not going to find it. From an agreeable standpoint, you're probably not going to find it. I'm not saying there aren't good black women out there. There clearly are. And for all the black women who are supporting black men with their platforms and their voices, I salute you. Problem is, you feel like the minority. There's an ocean of antagonism out there, and that's what you've got to face from an attitude standpoint. Women who largely look at men, black men, and think you're not good enough. Black women are the least likely to marry, the most likely to get divorced. And while this next data point is more anecdotal, meaning I don't have the data to support it, but when I just look at what's going on out in cyberspace, this is what I see. The one race of women who you can most count on to lead the charge in tearing their men down are black women. I just don't see that in other races of women. I hardly ever see it in other races of women. And it's common in the black community. If you want to find a wife, if you don't want to waste 10 years building yourself up so that you can be treated like leftovers, the best option seems to be to date out. People want attractive. No real way around that. But attractive comes in various shapes and forms. When I was in college, as a freshman, first got on campus, I hung out at the black parties. It was difficult. I'd come from high school where I was on the football team, the basketball team, the track team, the drama club. I could fit in with the jocks. I could fit in with the nerds. I was a big fish in a small pond, but the dating situation was much different there. I had a lot to fall back on, a lot to be recognized for. Suddenly, I was a freshman on a college campus and I was a nobody. I was just another student. At the black parties, I was utterly uninteresting. And after a couple of those, I thought, why am I here? This is not the college experience I was expecting. I thought that this would be carefree and exciting, and this is anything but. And I don't really understand what I need to do to fix it. But I started hanging out with my white friends and my Hispanic friends. And all of a sudden, in different social circles, I was received very differently. Suddenly, I am interesting. Suddenly, women do want to go out with me. Hey, I don't have to build myself up. Here are people who are comfortable dating their freshman peers. I was a bit exotic. And that was all it took. That was it. Everything else went out the window. I'm interesting. I'm different. And in particular, in college, it was a great experience. Now, if I were, well, let me not say 22, because right out of college, you're broke. Let's say 25. I've been working a while. I have some money. I have a little bit more means. I understand how to live as an adult. Because those first couple of years out of college, you're still basically a college knucklehead. You just have more money in your pocket. If I wanted a wife and I was 25, I'd go to the Philippines. I'd take all the vacation I had saved up for the year. I'd book a flight. I'd spend my 2 to 3 weeks in the Philippines. And the funny thing is, I would come back from that trip with a serious relationship. That's how easy it is to find women who want to be in relationships if you date out. Now, a trip to the Philippines can be expensive, so let's not pretend that everyone's got the couple of $1,000s to spend just taking a trip over there to see. However, look at the podcasts. Look at the Filipina P. She explains what life is like in the Philippines. Just type in Philippines. Look at the men who are living in the Philippines and are talking about the lives that they live there and the relationships, the wives that they have there. These are men who are happy. They have wives and lives, and they are happy. Look at the black dating market. Look at the women in the black dating market. Look at what you want, which is someone who you can build your legacy with, someone who you can work with, someone who you don't feel like you have to fight with. When you want to be a champion, take a look at the Philippines and ask yourself if it doesn't feel like it's ready made to provide you with what you want. Or Cambodia, or Vietnam, or parts of Russia. Take a look at the options and ask yourself whether it feels like you would have an easier time finding a wife there versus here. Now, maybe you don't want to travel. Maybe you don't want to learn a language. Maybe you don't want to deal with all of that. That's fine. The idea behind it is still rooted in being interesting, being attractive. In this particular case, exotic. Date out. OkCupid did a study. It's easy to look up. I'm going to guess it was roughly 10 years ago. And it was simple. They looked at who people try to interact with. And what did they find? Well, among men, looking at race, white men were the most preferred, black men were second most preferred, which is to say, there are lots of options for you as a black man if you open up your options and consider more women. Black women, among the races of women, were the least preferred. Now, generally, people will rail against those stats. Black women will rail against those stats, giving a million reasons for why those stats don't accurately present what's going on in the market. But let's challenge that for a second. What do I think is more true? Black women got the shaft, or black women just aren't as appealing as other races of women because they're more difficult? I think that's more the case. I think the numbers generally tell true stories. So why fight with women who don't want to work with you? Why deal with that when you can find women who do? When you can find women who will enjoy spending time with you, will celebrate you, will look for ways to get on your page. Why not choose those options? I think that's the better route to go. Consider this. When you're looking at population, black women are roughly 13% of all women. So if you've got 7 women in a room, one of them should be black. Okay. If you're focusing on black women, that means that 6 out of 7 women are being cast aside. What's the point in that? When you see women who say they want guys who make 6 figures or more, basically they're saying that 9 out of 10 men are being cast aside, roughly. You're starting with this teeny tiny pool, and then you've got additional filters. And then, even if you do find that needle in a haystack who meets all of your standards, you got to hope that that person's interested in you. Exact same thing happens when you focus on Black women alone. I'm not saying to ignore Black women, I'm just saying to stop treating them like they're special. 13% of women. If you date 7 women and one of them's Black, okay, you're playing pretty much the odds. If you date 7 women and 6 of them are Black, well, you might want to expand your consideration set. Because if you do, you might have wildly different results. There are movements out here like MGTOW, incels, guys who are basically saying, you know what? I've tried to make the dating market work. I've tried to make relationships work. And the deck is stacked against me. The fact of the matter is, it is stacked against you. If you're not beautiful, you don't have the same options. Your options are drastically reduced. If you are thinking about marriage, you are signing up for something that could be one of the worst catastrophes of your life. Marriage laws do not favor men. Women can go into divorce figuring that the least they're going to get out of the situation is half. For men, the most you're going to walk away from that situation with starts to feel like half of what you've worked to build. And it's going to be because she divorces you. Men largely are not the ones initiating divorce, much more so when it's Black relationships. So, expand your set. Look for more options than just Black women, because most of the options fall outside of being Black women. Look for the options that favor you. Don't fight with Black women who tear you down, who don't think you're worth their time. Just move on. There are tons of women out there who do think you're worth their time. And that doesn't even start to scratch the surface of what you'll find if you're willing to travel abroad for short periods of time. You can find a relationship, you can build, you can be happy, but you probably need to move out of, dating in, because that's not a combination that seems to work. The percent of men who were dating out across all Black men, it's like 85%. No, excuse me, it's like 15% dating out, 85% loyal. A little higher than other races, where for other races, about 10% date out. But what you'll find is, and I applaud the youth for doing this, among younger Black men, those numbers are starting to climb. 20% ish. Some reports suggest even higher. So guys are finally starting to say, you know what? I'm not going to waste my time fighting to win your favor when I don't have to waste my time fighting to win the favor of all these other women. Other women see my value. Other women will appreciate me. Let's find the women who actually are interested in us, regardless of what their race is. Let's focus on them. Make ourselves happy. And if all these other women feel jilted, well, you know what? They can change their attitudes. Come step up and play our game. That's a much better way for us to do this. And with that, that's a wrap.